Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'll let people keep rolling in, but I'm Tanya with SmartBug, and today we're going to be talking about right-sizing your tech stack. So if you are thinking about building that systems landscape, whether it's for operational efficiency, to save cost, we're going to talk about everything you need to know to plan for that journey and be packed and ready. We're going to start first with a few housekeeping things. Yes, we are recording. At the end of this, we will send this to you. You'll have it in your email along with some extra resources to help you get started. You should have that by Friday. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go. We'll be answering those at the end. And if we can weave them into our conversation as we go, we absolutely will. So we'll start with a quick review of the agenda, and hopefully we've got some more friends getting online and joining us here shortly. You probably see here with me, I've got Brent and Zach, two of my favorite SmartBugs. Brent is our Director of Technical Services, and Zach is our Senior HubSpot Solutions Consultant. And if any of our HubSpot friends from the solutions team are online with us today, they lovingly refer to Brent and I as Branya. So that is our celebrity mashup name. If you're joining us and have met with us before, seen us in a meeting, Brett and I tend to work together a lot on a lot of our complex, migrations, integrations, exactly what maybe some of you are thinking about doing today. So we've seen it all, and we're here to share our tips and secrets. So Brent, Zach, I'm going to pass it to each of you and let you introduce yourselves.
Sure, Zach, go ahead. I'll let you start.
All right. Hey, I'm Zachary Chastain. I'm our Senior HubSpot Solutions Consultant. I work on Brent's team. Anything that has to do with extensibility of the CRM, complex migrations, custom integrations. We tend to tag team a lot of that work here at SmartBug.
And I'm Brent. I have been with SmartBug for about 3.5 years. I was brought on to kind of oversee this team when we first got launched. My background is in big solution architecture, big databases, multi-platform, lots of data. So a lot of these things that we're going to talk about today are things I've seen from not only my time here at SmartBug, but previous jobs as well.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Brent. I'm excited to have this conversation with y'all today. We're going to start off first with a quick poll. Would love to get your feedback. We hear a lot of different reasons when people are thinking about reevaluating that tech stack, and curious to know what yours may be. So what led you here today? What are you most interested in? And we'll share the answers, but also it'll help us kind of guide what we chat about and some of the advice that we can offer in today's webinar. Should we take some bets, Brent, Zach, on what we think the #1 answer is?
Yeah, I'm going to go with saving money.
Okay.
I'm going to go with new functionality. All
right. I think I'm going to double up with Brent there and go on with saving money. I think that's on everybody's mind right now. But if it were me and I were sitting in that chair, and then the one time I went through this process when I was working on the client side, it was adoption, right? Like I couldn't get what I needed, and I needed to be able to see what people were, kind of putting in there. And, if that meant a change to get them to pick up and use it more, then that's what we had to do. All right, let's see those answers. Oh, if we were in Vegas, we would have lost, Brent. It was not saving money. So we had 40% of people say they wanted to increase productivity and reduce, eliminate that redundancy. A tie, 40% wanted new functionality. So their tech stack probably wasn't scaling with them. No one wanted my answer. No one wanted increased adoption. So don't put me on the roulette table. And 20% to save money, to reduce cost. And I think that's a pretty common theme with what we're seeing right now today, and why a lot of people are, kind of saying like, hey, let's take a pause. Is this the right thing? Are we, are we set up for success? So thanks everybody for putting in your answers there. All right, so let's talk about how we kick things off. We're talking about a tech stack that fits like a glove. And how do you create that roadmap, making the trip, avoiding those detours, and arriving in one piece? When our team talked about this collectively, it is a destination and it is definitely a journey to get there. So you probably heard our National Lampoon's theme song in the beginning, and that is going to be our theme for the day as we kind of go through this and share some of our tips and tricks with you. So much like Clark was hoping to arrive at Wally World. Okay, let's go. Come on. There's always one person like leading the show. Like they're ready. Like they can see the vision. They know that it's going to be, we're going to arrive in a better place and everybody's going to have fun and it's going to be great and it's going to be fantastic. But there's some planning that you have to do to get there. So we're going to kick it off today with Zach. And, Zach, the number one question I think that we kind of go through is, you have to understand your why. You have to understand why you're making this move. That was part of our poll that we heard in the beginning. And now you know that it's time to consider that change. So help us, Zach. Help us figure out, where do we start and how do we plan for this journey?
Yeah. So you really want to start by understanding your goal. And that's probably going to be, everybody's going to have that like primary driver, whether it's new functionality or saving money. But realistically, there's probably a mix of those goals where you have several different objectives that you're trying to achieve, and you really want to understand by the time you arrive at that destination, what does that look like for you? What is a successful project? And then you really want to start understanding your timeline. So a good place to do that is to start from any like licensing deadlines you have, especially if you're doing a migration, and just work backwards from there.
When you talk about licensing deadlines, Zach, you mean like, okay, so my subscription to X platform is up, right?
Exactly.
Are there any kind of tips that you can give that say like, hey, you should start thinking about this how far in advance? Like when is the right time to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, the earlier you can start planning, the better off you are, because you might look at those deadlines and start working back from it and realize like, we really only have like 2 months to do this project and it needs to be a 4-month project. So the earlier you can start thinking about it, the better, because it just does give you more runway to plan and to get everything launched and to just make sure that you've checked all of your boxes early on, because a lot of people do like to kind of rush through this stage of planning and get started, and that's a natural reaction, especially when you're on a tight timeline. But also, if you miss some of these key pieces up front, it's going to come back and bite you later on in the project.
Is there a timeline that scares either one of you?
I've seen.
I knew Grant would have an answer.
Less than 3 months,
Yeah.
I would say 3 months is probably a really critical milestone. If you got less than 3 months, you're going to rush. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to give yourself ample time, especially on the back end of things like validation, testing, training, all those things that are important.
Yeah. So fair to say then, right, that you want to start thinking about, where is it we're going? What is it we're trying to solve for? Like, what does that success look like? Well, before you get into that 3-month zone, right? So that at that 3-month zone, you're ready to like hop on the plane.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say 3 months is the danger zone. Like it's the red zone. Okay. Like you want to avoid that if you can. You want to 6 months minimum is an ideal timeline. Like if sorry to jump in. 6 months minimum is an ideal timeline, and it also depends on the systems that you're working with as well. Like if you're migrating something big, 6 months may not be enough. So you need to be thinking about like, what is the change, and think about what's my runway to get this done and get it done well.
Okay, so 3 months we might not get our passport in time.
Correct.
All right.
Yep. And You also want to start thinking about, who's going on this trip with you, who are your stakeholders, which departments do you want to involve? And you need to be thinking through not just who's going to drive a decision to make that change, but also who's going to be affected by it. Because a lot of times what you see are, stakeholders who were left out of that process, and then the end result might not really be what they need because they were never involved in the beginning. They weren't involved throughout the project. And, if they just send it off to them, it may not really meet their needs, and that's going to hurt adoption. It's going to hurt the effectiveness of the end solution. So you really want to make sure that everybody is involved from the very beginning who will be impacted by this, even in the smallest measure, just so you're able to take their input into consideration and make sure that you're going to be able to meet everybody's needs.
Yeah. And what they want, right? Like, what can't you do today that you want to be able to do, whether it's faster or easier, or not have to jump to a different system to do that. So,
Exactly.
I feel that sometimes in even in our own tech stack, right? Like, how can we move things faster and make it a little easier?
Mm-hmm. And once you have all the right people at the table, now you can start thinking through requirements and understanding, what are going to be deal breakers for this new system, where if we don't have this, it's not going to meet our needs. And you really can't start thinking through that until you have the right stakeholders involved. Otherwise, there's a good chance you could end up at the wrong destination.
Uh-oh. We don't want to end up at the wrong destination. Because then what? You're doing this all over again?
Yeah, you're looking at a follow-up project to fix what was missed to begin with, or it may even become something where, that's just a fact of your life now. This is what you have, and there is no budget and an opportunity to go back and fix it. I mean, the more you can, that's why I say you really want to think through this stage of the project and not rush through it, because it's critical.
Time and money.
Yep. And so as you start to think through, how are you going to right size your tech stack? A great tool for this can be putting together a tech inventory, and that can be as simple as a spreadsheet, something like what you see here on the screen, where you've got your platform, you've got, what function is the platform performing in your tech stack, who are the primary users and stakeholders, and when are you renewing that license. And this can help you in a few ways. One, it gives you that full picture of the stack. So when you're having these conversations, everybody understands what platforms are we talking about, what's going to be affected downstream. If we are forgetting somebody, it's going to become apparent really quickly when we're looking at, who's using these systems and going to be affected by those changes. And then also it's really helpful to start looking at, are there some redundancies in the systems that we have? That way we can start to identify those and decide at this stage, like, yeah, we really want to reduce some of these systems and figure out what we can do to just kind of get things more right-sized.
Yeah. And this is a great format. I can actually see benefit in keeping this going at all times, right? Because sometimes you can get different departments or different stakeholders that are adding on and patching on a different functionality. And then that's where, before you know it, you've got this tech stack that doesn't fit anymore. And it is costing you productivity because you've got things kind of patched on here and there, and you don't know where they came from or how they're being used. So seeing this at a glance, I'm curious if, like, some people who are listening, if you can just drop in the chat for us, like, do you keep track of your licensing and your different platforms like this, and know who's using it and when they're up for renewal? Because this is a great snapshot to know, okay, like, what is the nucleus of this tech stack, and which one are we backward, reverse engineering our plan, for a move? What others can we maybe do in phases, right? But seeing it like this, what's interesting to me is curious from both of you, like, where do you see people cobbling on extra tools when when teams aren't talking to each other, that causes that tech stack to kind of get out of control? Like, where does that growth tend to happen?
Yeah, Tanya, I was just thinking the same thing. Like, this inventory does one great thing, and that is it helps you eliminate bloat. You know, the tech stack bloat is other teams coming in and saying, oh, here's a shiny new object. Let's just use it. Let's put it to use. Let's buy it. And but if they would have taken some time to look at something like this and it's being kept up to date, it's like, oh, someone else in the organization is already using a tool like this. We just need a license for it and learn how to use it and integrate it, as opposed to go buying something else. So, you know, keeping this up to date will kind of help eliminate some of those things. You see it a lot, probably if you're guessing teams, you know, I'll pick on coming from a technical background, I'll pick on developers a lot. You know, sometimes we want some extra tools and stuff we don't need. But marketing also seems to do this because marketing landscape is changing so quickly and there's so many new tools being released that it's easy to get distracted and go find something, when in reality, there may already be a tool that's being used elsewhere in your company that may do something. Telium, you know, this is an example here, like Telium being a great example, you know, being a CDP. You know, maybe you're wanting to use it because you're trying to gather a whole lot of analytical information, but then you have Snowflake sitting there that's already gathering all this information. Well, do you really need two? Or do you just need to have someone help you stand up something in Snowflake, maybe putting like a business intelligence tool on top of it so you can get to the information you need?
Yeah,
That's
for sure. You see it a lot with analytics platforms, with email marketing platforms, where you know you see people who have adopted a system and it works great for their team, but then someone else went out and bought something that has a lot of overlap with what's already there.
Yeah, I was waiting for y'all to call out sales, and I know you didn't, just because that's me. I know you wanted to say all those salespeople that go and add on things for like knowing what your prospect's looking at and visibility and things. So I know that we're probably, you know, I'll speak for the salespeople to say that we're not immune from that shiny object syndrome for sure. All right, now you know where you're going. You know the destination. You know, like, what is this ideal tech stack going to look like for me? Tell us, Zach, how do you prepare that roadmap? Like, how are we going to get there now? Like, what's the path? What do we need to, we're packed, right? Like, we know what we're taking. We know who we're taking. How do we build that roadmap?
Yep, great question. So really, we've got everybody together. We know who's along for the ride. We're starting to think through, you know, who's going to influence this decision and also who's going to be impacted by it. You know, now we need a map to be able to reach that destination. So this is where diagramming your systems at a high level can really help you. This is kind of the next step evolution beyond that, that inventory, where you actually start to look at, you know, what types of systems do we have in our stack? What are the record types? You know, in HubSpot and Salesforce, those are called objects. You know, what are those record types that exist in each system, and how are they interacting with each other? Is data flowing, you know, from just HubSpot to Salesforce? Is it bidirectional? You know, starting to understand how data is flowing between the systems, how they're all interacting, how you categorize them. That's going to help you to just understand, when you're having those conversations with your team, how are all these systems actually going to talk to each other? Because it's really easy at this stage, especially if you're integrating a lot of different systems and potentially making changes to some of those systems at the same time with a migration, to, you know, have something like custom objects that someone just forgot existed, and now that's a surprise that pops up later on in your project and you have to account for it, and that could be really difficult in that moment. But, you know, if you looked at everything together as a team in this format at the beginning, you understand what data you're working with and what objects, what record types. It can really help you uncover some of those gotchas before you get that far along into your project.
Yeah, I think some of those connection issues too, or at least what, you know, we've seen come up are, can the systems talk to each other? And the answer is always yes, they can, but how easy is it for them to talk to each other in a custom way or in a, you know, a mildly custom way? And that kind of, I think from there, you need to look at, you know, API documentation, things like that. And if what's the value? Like, what's the total cost of ownership to make this happen? What are we getting out of the investment to make these systems talk to one another? And if it is worth it, then how do we go go that path to build that connection so they can talk? I think probably in most cases they're fairly similar, and I think we can build that bridge. But we have encountered sometimes when whether it's property management or specific industries where they want to bring in a solution into their CRM or into a HubSpot to make their productivity easier. And we can how do you even like think about like perfect world, perfect state? What's everything that I want to be able to have communicating?
Yep.
Right.
Tanya, I was just you just said to read my thoughts today, I guess. I was just thinking the same thing. Like
It's too much of that Branya vibe, Brent. Like we spent too much time together.
No, this is truly like the vision. Like this is like, hey, this is utopia for us as our tech stack. This is how we'd like for everything to talk and everything to be shared. And the reality is, like, some systems just don't play nicely. And so as you're thinking through figuring out your tech stack, maybe you don't need that particular system. Maybe you need to find one that gives you what you need, but gives you the functionality and the ability to integrate with other systems. Because there's some requests that would come in, to Zach and I, and we start looking up like, yeah, you just can't do it. Like they don't have an API. They don't support this data being moved out, in an automated fashion. You have to do manual work. And so now you have to start evaluating, is this really the right tool? And it kind of comes into this overall journey, right? It's like, what's the right tool? Does it give us, and does it allow us to automate as much as possible without having to have too much manual intervention to accomplish the same goal?
Yeah. And is it an all or nothing thing, or can it be done in phases? Like, can you look at this map and determine like, hey, this is our MVP, and then here's where, future state, this is what a phase 2 looks like. This is a phase 3. Or should organizations be looking at an all or nothing?
I think a phased approach makes sense, especially as you get into more complicated projects, because there are going to be, I mean, I've seen situations where you may not know what that end state is going to look like for some of those systems. There's systems that are new and being implemented during an integration project, for instance, and you don't necessarily know what that's going to look like at the end. So there has to be a phase 2 for you to properly evaluate that. And the more complicated it really just becomes something where you can't just knock it all out at once.
And to the point of an MVP, right? Is our ideal, we need to move off a platform because our license is due soon. And we'd like to have all of the new functionality of this new platform, but we don't have time to get it all stood up. But what's the least amount we need done to be able to continue operations? And then in phase 2, we can start incorporating the rest of the tool set. So you're right. It's like phases make sense unless you have a really long runway. And even then you may want to chunk the project up, just to make it more manageable task with clearly defined milestones and goals with it. Yeah.
And I just want to go back to one point that Zach made before we got here. And that's that, the stakeholders that are coming along with us on this journey, right? And the theme of like impact versus influence. There's stakeholders who are saying like, this is what we need, and this is how we want to improve productivity, and this is how we want to see it work and flow. But then you have your end users, or maybe even some of those teams that aren't end users. Like, let's take IT, for example. When do we bring them into the mix and understand and know, like, how are they going to be impacted by the changes that we're going to be bringing to the table and what we want to happen? So I think that's a really good point for people to remember about, involving the right people in the conversations as you're building this roadmap and how it's going to relate to them. So,
and Tanya, let me jump in and say, you should involve IT sooner rather than later, especially if it's impacting systems that they manage directly. Because if you don't, they're going to come to points like, oh, this violates the security protocol, or we can't do this because XYZ. And so there's been several times where I've seen clients engage with projects that they will start that process and they'll get pushback from IT because no one consulted with them early enough. So definitely bring IT into the mix early, just so you can make sure you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and making sure you're not dealing with data compliance issues, security compliance issues, anything like that.
I think that's a perfect transition, Brent, now that Zach's got us all packed up and ready to go, and you're going to walk us through what do we expect, right? How do we master that art of execution. What are we going to be doing along this road and getting there? Because again, it is not a quick, trip to the grocery store. It is definitely a lot of moving parts, a lot of different pieces. We don't want to, lose our luggage. We don't want to have data, spilled on the side of the highway, and we don't want anybody strapped to the top of the car. So, Brent, tell us how, you've done this a lot. You've mastered the art of execution. I know you're a big fan of Clark Griswold. In fact, if anybody got on early, they could see like Brett, dancing to the Holiday Road song. I think it's probably like his own personal theme song. But tell us where, execution. What can we expect? Nobody likes surprises. What's this journey going to look like?
Sure. So there's a guy I used to work with at one of my previous jobs who had this in the tagline of his email: measure twice, cut once. And I love that, because the more I started doing projects like this, the more that really made sense to me. And he was very much on the IT side. So he's talking about right sizing hardware, like how big of a server do we need? How much data, how much memory, and all that. But even doing projects like this, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm a big fan of two big things. One, a business requirements document. So this is a document where you're talking with all the different stakeholders, everyone that Zach said you need to have involved. You start having conversations with them and say, okay, this is what's changing. This is how it's going to impact. Let's talk about how this is going to impact your team. And the end result of this document is, what's changing, how it needs to change, what the end result should be, any of the gotchas, any of those things should be documented in here, as well as any milestone dates or anything like that, to where you can start putting a project plan to it fully. But this document is, going to give you everything you need. And the important thing here is the last point: make sure everyone signs off on it, because inevitably someone's going to read this like, well, what about this? Like we talked about this, why isn't this in here? This becomes kind of your guiding principle, your guiding document to how the project needs to move forward. So getting this BRD, getting everything documented, getting sign off from everyone is crucial to make sure that you get moving with a project the best possible way. The second thing I'm a big fan of is a mapping document. And the reason why I'm a fan of mapping documents is, especially when you're talking about a lot of different systems, they all collect different things. And some of this data needs to move to different places, and you need to know where it's going to move and how it's going to move. And the diagram we showed earlier is kind of a great example. Okay, we know high level how we all just want to connect, but now let's get down to the nitty gritty and let's figure out what really needs to move. So let's take a migration, for example, because we do a lot of those. They're wanting to move from system A to system B. And a great example, maybe they're wanting to move from Salesforce to HubSpot. I like to pick on Salesforce with this line. Maybe they're wanting to make that transition, and they have all this data and all these objects, and they have all these other systems that Salesforce was communicating with. And the mapping document starts lining, okay, for a contact object, for a lead object, for an opportunity, where does this now live? And now let's start talking about what may need to change. Maybe the data type is slightly different. Maybe we need to move it to different systems, so we need somewhere to note that. The mapping document starts allowing you to piece all that together, so that way you kind of have this idea of like, okay, from point A to point B, how are we moving data, and what does it look like? What needs to change? Any transformations? A great transformation example, because everyone's like, well, what's a transformation, right? Think about dates. Not every system takes the same date format. HubSpot, until recently, if you were moving some dates, especially like an integration side, you had to like format it in Unix timestamp. But at some other places, when they exported in like a standard ISO format, when your standard, month, day, year, times, hours, minutes, seconds. And so sometimes you have to know how that needs to translate to be able to move that. So the transformation is like listing, like, this is going from this format to this format. How do we do that? And so as you're doing the actual execution of the work, now you know how the data needs to move. This is your sanity check. Also,
so Brent, how does somebody say I'm leading this project and I'm non-technical, right? Like how do I figure that out? Like, where am I going to notice that? Who's helping me input this data to figure those things out?
Ideally, you have someone fairly technical in the project, maybe not like a developer, but maybe like a solutions architect type role, someone that understands data, someone that understands how systems piece together. but someone who can help translate the technical side of a system to a very business side and be able to document it in such a way that you know that this is what's going to be impacted by moving from a data perspective. So you need someone a little bit more technical than maybe just a end user business user.
Does that person have to be on your team?
Not necessarily. I've worked with, in previous jobs, I've worked with clients that didn't have that role, or more specifically, they didn't have the bandwidth for that role inside the organization. So they actually brought an outside company in to help guide this because they needed that extra help in making sure the lift that they were doing could be executed because there's just a lot of things moving. And so they brought in help, because they didn't have the bandwidth and they needed someone with a little bit more technical expertise on all these different systems and how to get it to work.
There's probably a little bit of a loss too in translation, wouldn't you think? Like in understanding like what you said, where, what it is in one system and how it might be different in the other, and being able to almost be like that translator for them. But sometimes too, I feel like we see instances where there are things you shouldn't move or migrate. It's a great time for cleanup. And what do we want to plan to set up net new? Like, where do we have too many workflows, or where do we have too many forms? And, we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of them, but we also don't want to move them. We want to be able to set them up new. Is that kind of when you're collecting this asset information and creating that designation of what we're moving versus, what's going to be new in the new system and how it all talks together?
Exactly, because a lot of times when you're going through the process of requirements document, you're going through mapping, you start to realize, are we really using this? Or even something we've seen a lot in migrations to HubSpot is they would have workflows set up in other systems that HubSpot does automatically. So we had one client come to us and say, oh, we have like 40 workflows that need to be moved. And when we got into it, we realized, oh, well, of the 40, 15 of them are natively handled by HubSpot functionality. So we can start eliminating things that had to be moved that makes the migration run a little bit faster, smoother. And starting to gather that stuff in requirements, and then mapping too is like, do we need this data? Are we using it? Start doing that analysis of the fields in the source system. Like, is it being used in reporting? Is it being used, in downstream systems? And if it's not, evaluate the need. Does it need to move over? Is this just white noise in the midst of all of our ecosystem, right? And start really scaling down, become a little bit more leaner. And to what you said earlier, productivity, the leaner you are with your data and how things run, the more productive and efficient the tech stack and the people using are going to be.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that we've run into that too, where we'll have, clients that have, 800 forms or 1,200 workflows. And it's like, is that really productive, right? Like, when's the last time you checked that? Or when's the last time someone looked at that? And where's the duplication and, being able to kind of streamline that? Because if you're moving to a new system, what did our poll say? Our poll said, it was for, features and functionality. And where can you reduce that overlap for sure?
Definitely.
This is probably my favorite section of the whole webinar. And so I'm glad that we got to this, and we're going to have plenty of time to spend on it, because I feel like in terms of value and takeaways, this is where like you can get definitely the most out of squeezing our brains. No one likes surprises. I don't like good ones, bad ones. Like, I don't like surprises. One of my favorite managers a long time ago, he used to have a no surprises meeting every Monday. He would bring his team, he would bring his agency into the conference room, and he would be like, everybody has 2 minutes. What is something that might surprise me this week, good or bad? It didn't matter if it was gonna likely happen. It was like, if it could happen, like, tell me what good or bad could happen. And then that way he could mentally prepare for the week of, what might be coming at him. And then he could better process it. Right. We thought a lot alike. So that's always like kind of stuck with me. And so what are common mistakes and things that teams can avoid when they're embarking on a project like this? Because it's not something you do all the time. It's not something anybody's going to ever be like, perfect at, right? Because there's always a lot of nuances and change as you go through it. So what are some common mistakes? We don't want to land at a complete detour. We want to avoid our traffic delays. We don't want to get to Wally World and find out that the park's closed. So what are common mistakes and things that we can avoid?
Yeah, there's some really simple things we can look at. So continue with the theme of the road trip. What are the things that like you forget to set the alarm? Going back to what Zach said earlier, this is like planning it out. Like, do I give myself enough time to do this and do this well? Not rush, not mess things up. So if you get started too late or you don't give yourself enough runway, this is just ripe for issues, right? There's going to be something that comes up and you're going to have to extend a platform contract, which costs more money. Now you got duplicate platforms running, those are just, that's one of the biggest things. Like, make sure you give yourself enough time. Forgetting your passengers, there have been times where, you miss a team or you miss someone that's critical. Didn't realize they were using a system, and all of a sudden you start shutting things down, or they get wind of the change. Like, wait a minute, why wasn't I include this conversation? I use this way, and it's not documented anywhere. You don't know that you're missing it. So, make sure you're like really reaching, but you always ask this question: is there anyone else impacted? You're going through these meetings, ask the question: is there anyone else using the system that we haven't talked to? Can anyone think of anyone? Try to make sure you catch as many people as you can.
It's funny how even the littlest, smallest feature that you may not realize is a big deal can be a huge deal, right? I know we recently went through a change with our document signing, and one of the things on the sales team that was super important to us is being able to know when documents were open and having those notifications, because you have that intel on activity. And so even though we can solve all of our problems with a different feature or different solution, that one teeny tiny thing that's missing can cause so much heartache for the end user. So it's so easy to look at things in a broad way and not realize how it trickles down to those day-to-day users. So definitely not forgetting passengers, but want to back up and ask you one question on the arriving too late, because you said something we didn't mention earlier, and I'm curious. Do you recommend having enough time, ideally, perfect world, perfect state? Do you recommend having your systems run side by side for a little bit, before your subscription expires, maybe in your CRM? Let's say you're moving from, let's say you're moving from Service Cloud to Service Hub, right? Is there a time when it makes sense to have them both running, or is it a clean switch, one to the other?
I think that's a big, it depends.
Okay.
Using your example, Service Hub to Service Cloud, you need to leave yourself.
No, Service Cloud to Service Hub.
Yeah, sorry, Service Cloud to Service. Man, I messed that one up, didn't I?
That matters. That matters.
Yeah. Service Cloud to Service Hub, using that example, it would be hard to try to manage tickets in two systems or capturing on both systems. So you probably need to have a clean cutover date to say, this is when we're going to start accepting tickets in HubSpot as opposed to Salesforce. But you may need to have the leeway to leave Salesforce up and going, just in case you're 2 or 3 weeks into the switch and realize, oh man, there was something that we were using over there that we don't have over here, or there's a piece of data that we're missing or something. So that way you're not necessarily running them truly in parallel, but you're not losing anything because you haven't got rid of the other system. You haven't done the full shutdown. You haven't done that. There are some systems though you can run in parallel, maybe like a data intelligence tool, business intelligence. You can run reporting off two systems and be okay. And that way you can kind of see, is the new system really giving us the same? The old system, you have the side-by-side comparisons. So to answer your question, I think it depends. I think it depends on the platform, how it's being used, what it's capturing, and who all is using it.
Yeah, I think also that goes back to the question of phased approaches too, because in the example of moving from Sales Cloud from Service Cloud to Service Hub, you might have let's say you have some knowledge base articles that are being hosted and you're also working tickets, you could get part of that system moved over to your new system. So now you're working tickets out of HubSpot, and maybe you're still hosting your knowledge base over here until you have the opportunity to actually spend the time to move it over. So, you could look at a phased approach for some of that as well, so that you're not at least duplicating functionality between two systems.
A great point, Zach.
Awesome. Tell us about highway construction.
Yeah, this one's always the fun one. And this is where the forgetting the passengers, doing the BRD, all those things up front hopefully help you avoid this. But sometimes it still just happens, right? It's like as you're migrating or as you're integrating, as you're doing any kind of these projects, like, oh, we forgot about this. And it's not documented anywhere. And you find out midstream, and now you've got to think, what does this impact to change? Like, this is going to impact our schedule because now we have to assign resources to do it. It's going to impact data downstream possibly. How does that happen? And so you're just going to find some things as you go. And part of what I like about project planning for things like this is always including some buffer time, because sometimes we use the saying, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you don't know that you missed something until you get into it. So give a little bit of time in the project planning to allow for new items to come up or be discovered. Or maybe it's like, be really nice if we could do this. We don't have time for phase 2. Do we have time to add this in as well? So it may not be necessarily that you're missing from a previous system. Maybe, hey, this functionality would be really useful. Do we have time to implement it now as we're moving systems?
I feel like that's kind of how people get in this situation in the first place, right? They've onboarded systems and they haven't thought about scalability. How is this going to grow? Sometimes, organizations will onboard different pieces of technology because it's what they can afford where they are in that time, or it's suitable for who they are as a company at that time. And they're not thinking forward to how can this scale with me? How can this grow with me so that I'm not patching on a bunch of different things here and there to solve for different problems and solutions and trying to band-aid a problem when I really should have, started someplace else, or, I should have gotten a bigger size, right? Like that I could grow into. So I think if you're finding yourself in this spot and you're having to go through this process, don't buy for what fits right now, buy for what's going to fit. And you answer that question. What's going to fit? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? How far out should people be looking?
Yeah, when we used to scope databases at one of my previous employers, we always included growth of the database as far as like thinking about how much size they need. Your platforms are the same way. Like, we are where we are now, but where do we want to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years? Time, like you said, like, what does that growth plan really look like? Does this tool really help us get there? And so the part of the evaluation of the tool could be, that they haven't changed much and it doesn't look like it's growing much. Maybe this is the right platform for us. Or, we realize we're going to invest X more dollars that we don't need right now, but in 1 year, we'd really like to add on to this tool set. So why don't we go ahead and make the investment now, knowing a year from now, we don't have to change systems again. We already have the tool set there. We just now get to implement it.
Right. Great point.
Yeah. Next one. What's that?
I said underpacking. This is never something that I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, missing the key functionality. And we kind of touched on this a little bit. It's like, what is it that team needs that we didn't talk about? Maybe it's maybe you're moving to a platform and you're wanting to shut down a calling system. You're like, oh, but we didn't think about sourcing a new calling system, or can our calling system move to the new platform? Can it integrate fine? The little things like that start becoming important to try to capture at the beginning. So that way, if something needs to change, what the change is going to be. So I'll pick on, like I said, the calling platform is a great one. Maybe we're moving from a sales team, moving from Salesforce to HubSpot, looking at using the CRM primarily. You need a calling platform, and maybe you have something custom built for Salesforce because at the time someone convinced you that's a great idea. Well, when you move to HubSpot, that may not work. So now you say, oh, we need a new calling system. What does that look like? So now you got to go evaluate that. And if you catch that ahead of time, you catch that beforehand, now you start thinking about, okay, what does it mean for budget? What does it mean for time? All those little things you get to start taking into account early on.
Yeah. I want to add something too for underpacking, because I think it goes beyond features, functionality, and technology, right? You mentioned a sales team moving from like an older system, or even, some manufacturing companies that are looking for making that leap from like a legacy system that no one's using, or, they're still boots on the ground and doing things with Excel spreadsheets, right? And they're moving into a sales hub and they want efficiency, and, they're coming kind of like reluctantly, right? Like this is going to like bog me down, or this isn't something I want to use. Underpacking also can relate to making them successful in that adoption and in learning the system and being able to use it and move swiftly in it. And that can be training, right? Like, don't discount the time that you may need for training, and look at your team and look at their tech savvy. Can they gain the right level of knowledge by doing it virtually or through, trainings by the platform, by a partner, by your team? Or is it worth the investment to bring a team in and train them on site or in person? Maybe they meet up at a common location and they've got someone that's there more hands-on. So think about the tech savvy of the people that are going to be using the new technology, and be sure to bake in the time or plan for that time to help roll it out right the first time.
And I know Zach worked on a project that was very much that, earlier this year, where it was a very no, just gonna say a very old school company and how they handled, their sales function, and moving to HubSpot in particular. And one of the things that Zach and the strategist team did was they went on site to train. So they brought our team on site to teach them, this is how to best use HubSpot, and this is how we can set it up, and this is how we can customize it for you. So that way they could gain that adoption. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got 2 more on this list, and then I want to be able to leave enough time for questions, from the people that have joined us here today. But overpacking, I think this is probably the most common roadblock that people are gonna bog themselves down with.
Yeah, I mean, overpacking can be everything from like individual fields to just like old data. Like, do you really need, from 10 years ago, people who, never bought from you? It can be as simple as that. So, you can be thinking about what your sales cycle is. You can be thinking about what your marketing cycles are. You can think about how you want to try, any re-engagement campaigns with old leads, and decide, are these really worth it? And the other thing you start thinking, though, is like cleansing, like, especially if you're B2B, people move jobs. So are these emails even still valid? You can start looking to do some validation of the emails to see, is this record even still marketable? Because now we have bad information. They haven't been with that company in 4 years. So you start looking at all the different ways to clean up your data, to bring over and to be, like I said, be a little bit more lean, more efficient with your data and your databases.
Any tips for cleaning data? How you do it?
I'm a big fan of using tools like InCycle. As far as like one-time cleanups, for ongoing cleanups, HubSpot has a really great feature set that you can utilize there. But I think the key things are, Zach, I believe you use a tool, was it I'm trying to think the email tool you use to like validate email addresses.
Yeah, so like something like Never Bounce.
Never Bounce, that's what it was. Yeah,
validate email addresses.
Yeah, validate your emails before you send them, before you move them over. There's a lot of different tools you can use to do this. To validate like full records. And the other thing you do is start running analysis reports on, is this field being used? So maybe you can cut down the amount of fields you're bringing over.
Yeah. To Brent's point too about people moving around, a tool like ZoomInfo can help you keep updated on that information as well. If someone's changing jobs and now you've got old contacts in your database.
Yep.
Good point. This last one I'll take because it was mine. Leaving your wallet at home. So what I run into, especially, working with a lot of our larger and enterprise organizations that are making this, complex move, right? They reverse engineer the schedule for planning, like from those, forgetting to set the alarm, like here's when my subscription ends and here's how long it's going to take to implement and move. And we want to get started X date. And you know what they leave out? Procurement. The time for procurement, the time to go through a DPA process, compliance. If it's a platform, you've got your SOC 2, legal, red lines, MSAs, depending on how quickly your organization moves through that process. Sometimes it can take a few days. Other times I've seen it take up to 60 days when they have a large, not just a large motion for procurement, but they have a backlog, right? Like their legal team may have, 10 other things in front of it and they require a 30 or 60-day process. So just factor that into your schedule. If you're in an organization that has a lot of, a lot of steps in your procurement process, don't forget to leave that out of your reverse engineered schedule. So We have about 10 more minutes, and it looks like we have a few questions coming in. The first one is, in your experience, what's a common source of waste or that tech stack bloat we talk about, where you see a lot of duplicating features that are also available in HubSpot? And so just curious, if we've got someone that's asking this question, like, hey, where can I start looking for money to help be efficient and find some savings? What are some things that you see feature wise?
So I think a good good place to start is looking at anything you could really consider as a point solution. If you've got a tool like MailChimp in your tech stack, there's a good chance that is going to overlap with something else. With looking at something like Hotjar, and maybe you have another system that also does heat maps.
Chat's one, right?
Yeah, chat's a great one. Yeah, you see a lot of duplication of chat functionality. Just start looking at those point solutions. That's a good place to start. But realistically, you really want to get every system in your tech stack into that inventory. That way you can look at it holistically and say, I didn't think about these two systems, but there's overlap between them. I've even seen some crazy situations where clients had Zoom Info, Apollo, and two other sales intelligence tools all running together. And it's why do you have 4 of these? You only need one.
Right. And then you've also got things like, document signing, CPQ, quotes, when you could be using HubSpot quotes and building out, taking advantage of that, feature set it's just a matter of how do you format it? How do you set it up? How do you make it, work for your specific use case? And if you're not familiar with it, I think making that transition is just understanding how you can make that or tailor that feature to work for you. I think some other places where I might see it is sales sequences, you can do sequences in HubSpot, and add-ons that people, or even with AI, add-ons that people are, building kind of into that tech stack. Calendar features is one. HubSpot has a great feature where you can, insert meeting times or, book your meeting availability. So it's good to keep an eye on, or this would be my advice, keep an eye on new features that are coming out, things that are in beta, that HubSpot may be rolling out and offering, because what the HubSpot you have today may not be the HubSpot feature set that's available tomorrow. And so to kind of keep an eye on that and watch it and see oh, great, when I can roll this out or implement this, then I can probably reduce this piece of technology. So I think that's probably just just best practice to keep forward thinking on what's coming down the pipe.
And being the back end person, I want to say, look for redundancies in your databases. I mentioned earlier, do you need a CDP and a warehouse, or do you need one or the other? So knowing what your business use cases are for all this and what all those systems impact, maybe you can look at eliminating a large data store, a database or something, because those are usually costly. You look at a database, they're usually not cheap to not only acquire but to maintain.
Good point. We have another question here. What's the typical training that we recommend? Is it a one-time training to get people up to speed 100%? Is it, perfect adoption? How do we typically roll out and reinforce training and adoption of a new system?
I think a lot of times it depends on virtual versus live. Obviously a virtual training you can break into pieces. A live training, just because of if you're bringing someone in particular, the cost and the time involved, it makes sense to try to do it all at once over a day or two. Where a virtual training, you can break it into manageable chunks or whatever. So our typical process for training is usually virtual and in chunks. However, if it is someone that brings us on site, it depends. It depends on what the company is. If it's a large multi-brand, multi-state, multi-business unit company, maybe it's multiple on sites with a business unit at a time. So instead of having every one of the companies going to be using, maybe it's smaller groups. That way you can have more time for Q&A and questions and things like that. If it's a single site that's moving to it, maybe it's over 2 days. So you're spending one day covering this feature set, the next day cover the next, and still allowing time for Q&A to happen.
Yeah, I think for any group, it's good to be mindful that it's not a one-time thing, right? It's not you're going to sit in a 2-hour session and grasp it all. And being able to break that up into doses. Sometimes it helps like for people to have like, hey, here's the documentation, right? Like here's the out of the box stuff that you can look at and read, like being able to point them to those resources. But then it is super helpful when you can walk through and train in the environment and the landscape that you've actually set up versus like this evergreen, like, hey, here's how the system works, right? But letting them see if you've built out their sales pipeline or their life cycle stages and you've built out like workflows and things, like show them how it's going to work in their organization, and hands-on training where you maybe break it up into a few different sessions. Like here's what we're going to be learning about, like, just lay of the land. Here's certain features you may want to use. And then here's how-tos on different pieces, like more trainings for people who are going to actually be like building and doing certain things. And then like Brent said, like on-site trainings, and depending on the group or the region or even their level of tech savvy.
Yeah. And one thing to ask ahead of time, what is it that you want to learn about the most? What's the thing we train you on that's going to have the biggest impact?
Mm-hmm. Or what are you most afraid of in using this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so our last question here, someone has asked about our integration services. So, if you want to learn more, we'll drop a link in the chat there where you've got a link to our integrations page. Shameless self-promotion plug. We do this type of work for teams who need help migrating and integrating, and obviously have experience, and we've seen a lot of the roadblocks and detours, and have helped teams overcome those. But I think kind of starting from a clean place, knowing these things in advance and being able to prepare for them, plan for them, know how to look under the hood is the key to delivering one of these projects with the most sanity in check at the end. So when you reach your final destination. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. Brent, Zach, any final words before we jump off?
Yeah, listen, changing a tech stack can be a scary thing. But if you do it the right way, you do the right planning, you invest the time up front, it can be as smooth and as painless as you could possibly be. Don't rush it. Give your time to walk through the steps we talked about today. And of course, if you have any questions, that's what we're here for. And
we do run triage. So you got to admit, Brent, we do run triage sometimes. When people get really close to that, I might not get my passport in time. I would not be on the sales team if I did not leave with that lasting plug. Okay. So we want to thank everyone for joining. Please check your inbox. We've got some exclusive content coming to you. We'll also share this recording, and we hope we'll see you on SmartBug's next webinar. Maybe you'll see us again.